Maya Sterling believed coffee was more than a drink. It was a story in a cup. Each bean held a history, a journey from a sun-drenched mountain to her polished mahogany counter. And she, the storyteller, translated that journey for her customers. Her cafe, the daily grind, wasn't just a business. It was the culmination of a decade of relentless passion. Tucked away on a sun-dappled street in downtown Austin, it had become a sanctuary for those who appreciated the art of a perfect brew. Polished copper pipes gleamed above the counter, the air hummed with the gentle roar of the grinder, and the rich, intoxicating aroma of freshly roasted beans enveloped everyone who walked through the door. Maya had built this place with her own 2 hands. She'd started as a teenager, scrubbing floors and learning the rhythms of a bustling cafe kitchen. She'd worked her way up, from waitress to barista, saving every spare dollar. Her nights were spent poring over books about soil acidity, roasting profiles, and extraction techniques. She traveled not for leisure, but for learning, visiting small, family-owned coffee farms in Colombia and Ethiopia. She poured all that knowledge, every cent she had, and every ounce of her soul into the daily grind. Now at 28, she was the proprietor of one of Austin's most respected independent coffee houses, a place celebrated for its ethically sourced, single-origin coffees and its meticulous brewing methods. But Maya rarely spoke of her past. She let the coffee and the warm, inviting space she'd created speak for itself. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a presence that always seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. In walked Eleanor Vance, draped in a cream-colored Chanel blazer that probably cost more than Maya's first espresso machine. Eleanor was old money, a fact she broadcasted with every flick of her perfectly manicured wrist and every condescending purse of her lips. Her family's name was etched onto university buildings and museum wings, their fortune rooted in oil deals struck generations ago. To Eleanor, effort was something staff did. Success was a birthright, not an achievement. Eleanor and her circle of equally affluent friends had recently discovered the daily grind, not for the quality of its coffee, but for its Instagrammable aesthetic. They treated it like their personal clubhouse, a quaint little backdrop for their lives of curated leisure. "Oh, you're still here?" Eleanor said, her voice dripping with manufactured surprise as she approached the counter. She directed the comment at Maya, who was carefully calibrating the grinder. Maya offered a tight, professional smile. "It's my cafe, Mrs. Vance. I'm usually here." Eleanor let out a little laugh, a sound like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Of course. I just adore these little passion projects. So quaint." She scanned the menu board with a dismissive air. "I suppose I'll have a cappuccino, but please make sure the girl who actually knows what she's doing makes it. Not some trainee." She gestured vaguely towards a new hire, a bright-eyed teenager named Chloe, before looking pointedly back at Maya. The implication was clear. Despite Maya owning the establishment, Eleanor saw her as just another service worker, interchangeable and insignificant. "I'll be making your coffee personally," Maya replied, her voice even, betraying none of the irritation simmering beneath the surface. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost mesmerizing, her hands tamping the grounds, her focus absolute. As Maya worked, Eleanor continued her monologue, speaking loudly enough for half the cafe to hear. "It's just so hard to find good help these days. People with real standards. In Europe, the baristas have been training for generations. It's in their blood. Here," she trailed off, waving a dismissive hand, "anyone can call themselves a coffee maker." Maya placed the finished cappuccino on the counter. The foam was a perfect, velvety microfoam, the heart-shaped latte art pristine. It was a cup that screamed expertise. Eleanor glanced at it, unimpressed. "Well, I suppose it looks the part." She took a delicate sip, her expression unreadable. "It's adequate." Without another word, she swept over to her table, leaving Maya standing in a cloud of expensive perfume and quiet indignation. For Maya, it wasn't just an insult to her. It was an insult to the journey, to the farmers, to the bean itself. And it was a confrontation that was far from over. The invitation had been a coup for Maya. The Starlight Gala was the crown jewel of Austin's philanthropic calendar, a glittering affair attended by the city's most influential figures. The organizers, wanting something more sophisticated than standard-issue catering coffee, had approached the daily grind to host a high-end, pop-up espresso bar. For Maya, it was more than a lucrative gig. It was a validation. It was proof that her dedication to quality had broken through the noise, reaching the upper echelons of the city's culture. She'd spent weeks preparing, selecting 3 of her most exceptional single-origin beans, designing a sleek, minimalist bar that would complement the gala's elegant decor, and training her best barista, Liam, to work alongside her. The evening started spectacularly. Guests, dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns, were fascinated by the process. They asked Maya about the flavor notes of the Ethiopian yirgacheffe, watched, captivated, as she executed a perfect pour-over, and praised the rich complexity of their drinks. A sense of pride swelled in Maya's chest. She was in her element, sharing her passion, converting skeptics 1 cup at a time. She felt seen not as a service worker, but as the artisan she was. Then she spotted Eleanor Vance gliding through the crowd, a glass of champagne in one hand, her expression one of profound boredom. Her eyes landed on Maya's coffee bar, and a slow, venomous smile spread across her face. This was her territory, her social biosphere, and she looked at Maya as if she were an invasive species. Eleanor sashayed over to the bar, her gaggle of friends trailing behind her like pilot fish. She didn't address Maya directly at first, instead speaking to the man standing next to her, a tech mogul who had just been raving about his espresso. "Charles, darling, you mustn't let yourself be fooled by all this smoke and mirrors," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying across the polished floor. Heads began to turn. "It's a clever little show, I'll grant you that. All these beakers and scales. It's very theatrical." Maya's hand stilled on the portafilter she was wiping clean. She kept her eyes down, her jaw tightening. "Can I get you something, Mrs. Vance?" she asked, her tone clipped and professional. "Oh, I highly doubt it," Eleanor scoffed, finally turning her full, icy gaze on Maya. "You see, my standards are a little higher than what a waitress-turned-coffee pourer can provide." The word waitress hung in the air, loaded with contempt. A hush fell over the immediate area. The intrigued guests who had been chatting with Maya a moment before now took a subtle step back, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "I own the business, Mrs. Vance," Maya said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, we all know about your little shop." Eleanor laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. She looked around at the gathered crowd, projecting her voice. "Isn't it just the most inspiring story? A girl who used to serve greasy eggs and burnt coffee in some roadside diner. Now she's here with us. It's like a fairy tale." The humiliation was a physical blow. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She had worked as a waitress in a small-town diner to put herself through community college. It was grueling work, but she had never been ashamed of it. But in Eleanor's mouth the memory was twisted into something sordid, a stain that disqualified her from her current success. "She was just a maid before that, you know," one of Eleanor's friends chimed in, eager to please. "My cousin hired her for a summer. Said she was good at scrubbing floors at least." The lie was so blatant, so malicious, that Maya was momentarily stunned into silence. She was completely isolated, a specimen pinned to a board for the amusement of the wealthy. The crowd wasn't hostile, but in some ways their silence was worse. They watched, impassive, as if she were a character in a play. They were Eleanor's people, part of her world, and Maya was the outsider. "My success has nothing to do with my past jobs and everything to do with my expertise," Maya finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. "This is my profession. I've dedicated my life to it." Eleanor let out a theatrical gasp. "Expertise? My dear girl, you press a button on a machine. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're a barista. It's a job for students before they get real careers. To think you belong here, among people who have actually built things, who actually matter, it's laughable." She waved a dismissive hand towards the gleaming espresso machine. "You're just a coffee maker. A glorified button pusher who got lucky with a lease. Don't ever forget what you are." Tears of helpless rage pricked at the back of Maya's eyes. She stood frozen, speechless, as the circle of onlookers offered quiet snickers of support for Eleanor. In that moment, her beautiful cafe, her years of study, her travels, her awards, it all felt like it had been erased, reduced to ash by the cruel, careless words of a woman who had never worked a day in her life. She was utterly alone. Just as the humiliation felt absolute, a new voice cut through the tense atmosphere. It was calm, measured, and carried an authority that instantly silenced the snickering. Her name is not Geralda. All eyes turned towards the source. A man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark suit, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He had a kind, weathered face framed by a neat mane of silver hair. There was an immediate ripple of recognition and deference through the onlookers. This was Arthur Sterling, the founder and chairman of Sterling Coffee Roasters, a global empire built on a reputation for quality and ethical partnerships with coffee growers. He was a legend in the industry, a self-made billionaire who had started with a single small roastery in Seattle 5 decades ago, and was revered not just for his wealth, but for his profound, almost encyclopedic knowledge of coffee. Eleanor's face lit up, mistakenly believing an ally from her own stratosphere had arrived. "Arthur, darling," she gushed, moving towards him. "I was just explaining to everyone the importance of standards." Arthur Sterling completely ignored her. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed on Maya. He walked past Eleanor as if she were a piece of furniture and stopped directly in front of the espresso bar. The crowd held its collective breath. He looked at Maya, then at the equipment, a faint, appreciative smile touching his lips. A La Marzocco Linea PB Mythos grinder Achaia scales. "A setup for someone who doesn't compromise," he murmured, his voice full of genuine respect. Then he looked directly into Maya's eyes. A flicker of recognition dawned in his. "I thought it might be you, but I wasn't sure," he said, his voice warm. "Maya Sterling. It is you, isn't it?" Maya, still reeling from the attack, could only nod, her throat tight. Arthur Sterling's smile broadened. He turned to the stunned, silent crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with conviction, "you seem to be under a misapprehension, thanks to Mrs. Vance's commentary." He gave Eleanor a look so withering it seemed to make her physically shrink. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Maya, "is not just a barista. You are in the presence of one of the foremost coffee experts in the world." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Eleanor stared, aghast. 2 years ago," Arthur continued, his voice captivating his audience, "I had the privilege of watching the final round of the World Barista Championship, broadcast from Melbourne. The competition brings together the best national champions from over 50 countries. It is the Olympics of our industry. The winner that year was a young American who demonstrated a level of skill, knowledge, and innovation I hadn't seen in a decade. Her signature beverage, using a carbonic maceration geisha from Panama, was described by the judges as revolutionary." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then looked back at Maya with profound admiration. That champion was Maya Sterling. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Jaws literally dropped. The tech mogul Charles looked from Arthur to Maya, his eyes wide with astonishment. "To earn that title," Arthur explained, his gaze sweeping over the dumbfounded faces, "requires more than knowing how to press a button, as Mrs. Vance so crudely put it. It requires the palate of a master sommelier, the precision of a chemist, and the agricultural knowledge of a botanist. It requires years of relentless dedication, study, and practice. Maya Sterling hasn't just built a business. She has reached the absolute pinnacle of her craft. The reason her coffee tastes so good is because she is quite literally one of the best on the planet." He then picked up an unused cup, approached the pour-over station, and inhaled deeply from the bag of beans Maya had been using. "Ah," he said with a satisfied nod. "The Ethiopian Yirgacheffe Aricha station. Wash process. I can smell the notes of bergamot and jasmine already. A magnificent choice." It was the final undeniable confirmation. He hadn't just defended her. He had used his own legendary expertise to validate hers in front of everyone. The entire situation had been flipped on its head. The person they had dismissed as a coffee pourer was, in fact, royalty in her field, and the ultimate authority had just crowned her. All eyes now turned to Eleanor Vance. Her face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, had collapsed into a canvas of shock and abject mortification. She was exposed not just as a bully but as an ignorant fool. She had tried to humiliate Maya for her profession in front of the one man who could make her look like a complete and utter idiot for doing so. The silence that now surrounded Eleanor was no longer passive. It was heavy with judgment. She had picked a fight based on prejudice and lost it to a barrage of undeniable truth. The change in the room was instantaneous and absolute. The moment Arthur Sterling finished speaking, the bubble of isolation around Maya burst, replaced by a flood of warmth and respect. The tech mogul Charles was the first to approach her, his face etched with sincere apology. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice full of genuine remorse, "please accept my apologies. I stood by and said nothing. What you do is clearly an incredible art and I was ignorant. Your coffee is the best I've ever had." He extended his hand, not for a casual shake, but with the deference one might show a respected artist. One by one, other guests followed suit. A prominent lawyer praised her poise under pressure. A well-known restaurateur asked for her business card, immediately discussing the possibility of a collaboration. The host of the gala rushed over, apologizing profusely for Eleanor's behavior and thanking Maya for elevating their event. Her young barista Liam simply stared at her with wide starstruck eyes, his respect for his boss multiplying tenfold. She wasn't just Maya, his cool boss who knew everything about coffee. She was a world champion. All the while, Eleanor Vance stood frozen in a spotlight of her own making. The whispers that now filled the room were not of amusement, but of disdain for her. She had built her identity on social grace and knowing the right people, and in a single brutish outburst, she had revealed herself to be classless and crass. She began to back away, her face pale, desperate to escape the dozens of judging eyes. As she turned to flee, Arthur Sterling's calm voice stopped her one last time. "Mrs. Vance," he said, not unkindly, but with a firm finality. "A person's worth is measured by the passion and dedication they pour into their work, not by the name they inherit. This young woman has more character and substance in her little finger than many people acquire in a lifetime of leisure. Perhaps it is you who has something to learn about standards." Cornered, Eleanor stammered a pathetic, barely audible "my apologies," directed at the floor in front of Maya, before practically running from the ballroom, her social standing in tatters. In the wake of her departure, the atmosphere at Maya's coffee bar became the heart of the gala. A line formed no longer just for coffee but for the chance to interact with her. The incident had transformed her from a vendor into a celebrated guest of honor. Later, as the event wound down, Arthur Sterling approached her again. "I am truly sorry you had to endure that, my dear," he said gently. "But you handled it with a grace that is more telling than any trophy." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Maya said, her voice finally steady. "For what you did. You didn't have to." "Nonsense," he waved it off. "Excellence should always be defended against ignorance. Besides," he added, his eyes twinkling, "I had a selfish motive. I've been looking for a new head of quality and innovation for my North American operations. A role that involves sourcing, training, and developing the next generation of artisans. It requires a champion's palate and a creator's spirit. It's a difficult position to fill." Maya stared at him, her heart beginning to pound with a new thrilling rhythm. "I believe," Arthur Sterling said with a warm smile, "I have finally found the perfect candidate. That is, if you'd be interested in discussing it over a cup of coffee sometime." My treat, of course. The offer was staggering, a leap beyond anything she had dared to dream. It wasn't just a job, it was a kingdom. An opportunity to shape the future of the industry she loved on a scale she had never imagined. The evening had started with a bitter taste of humiliation, an attempt to tear down everything she had built. But it was ending with the sweetest validation, a testament to the fact that true talent, backed by integrity and hard work, was the most powerful currency of all. Her honor had been restored, and in the process, a door had been opened to a future brighter than she had ever imagined. 3 months later, the story of the Starlight Gala had become something of a local legend. Whispers of the takedown of Eleanor Vance circulated at cocktail parties and business lunches, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the person pouring your coffee. For Eleanor, the consequences were swift and severe. Her social capital evaporated overnight. She was no longer seen as an arbiter of taste, but as a purveyor of ignorance. She quietly resigned from 2 charity boards, and her appearances on the social circuit became scarce, the shame of her public exposure too great to bear. For Maya, life blossomed in ways she had never anticipated. The daily grind became a landmark. People came from all over the state, eager to taste a cup of coffee crafted by a world champion. Tourists added it to their itineraries, and local regulars felt a fierce pride in having recognized its quality long before the rest of the world caught on. Business boomed, allowing Maya to give raises to her staff, invest in even better equipment, and expand their direct trade relationships with farmers. She promoted Liam to manager, trusting him completely to uphold the standards she had set. But her own horizons had expanded far beyond the charming streets of Austin. After a series of exciting discussions, she had accepted Arthur Sterling's incredible offer. She wasn't just the head of quality and innovation, she was his protégé. The story finds its final scene not in a bustling cafe, but on a lush, mist-covered mountainside in the Terraza region of Costa Rica. Maya stood on the veranda of a small farmhouse, a steaming mug cradled in her hands. The air smelled of damp earth and sweet coffee blossoms. Beside her stood Arthur Sterling and an elderly farmer named Mateo, whose family had worked this land for 5 generations. They were deep in conversation about a new processing method Maya had developed, one that could potentially double the income for small farms like Mateo's by creating a more complex and sought-after flavor profile. She wasn't just buying their beans, she was investing in their future, sharing the knowledge she had spent a lifetime acquiring. She spoke with Mateo not as a corporate executive, but as a fellow artisan, one farmer's descendant to another. In this moment, looking out over the endless green rows of coffee plants, Maya thought back to that humiliating night at the gala. She thought of Eleanor's cruel words, her attempt to weaponize her past. She remembered her first job in that noisy diner, the burn of hot coffee she'd spilled on her arm, the exhaustion in her bones. For a long time, she had seen those days as just a means to an end, a part of her story she kept hidden. But now she understood. That job had taught her humility. It had taught her how to handle pressure, how to smile through exhaustion, how to treat every customer with dignity, whether they ordered a bottomless mug of drip coffee or a prize-winning geisha. It was part of the bedrock of her character. Eleanor in her gilded cage could never understand that strength wasn't inherited, it was forged in the fires of hard work. Arthur Sterling, as if reading her mind, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've given them hope, Maya," he said, gesturing out at the farm. "That's worth more than all the money in the world." Maya took a slow sip from her mug. The coffee was exceptional, a story of sun, soil, and struggle culminating in a moment of perfect, quiet triumph. It was her story too. She had not forgotten where she came from. She had simply redefined where she was going. Her worth was not determined by the opinions of the shallow or the scorn of the snobbish, but by the contents of her character and the quality of her craft. And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the valley, she knew with absolute certainty that it was a story just getting started.